Hi, my name is Amar Gandhi. This video is my Teach 1 assignment on participatory vendor selection. I will go over how to do the assignment assigned for this lecture. To reach a consensus, a 7-step process must be undertaken. This includes inviting decision makers, which includes selecting 2 vendors to compare, and then choosing 2 decision makers who will participate in your vendor selection process. Then you conduct a one-on-one interview with each decision maker. This is followed by holding a group meeting where you first select 3 criteria to evaluate the EHR vendors on based on what each decision maker said during your interview with them. Next, you ask them to rate the levels of each attribute on a scale from 0 to 100. Then you ask them to rank each attribute for each vendor by the level of importance to them. Then you calculate the assigned weights for each attribute. In step 4, you make a consensus model, which takes into account the preferences of both decision makers. Next, you have a group discussion about what's going on. In the second to last step, you measure the vendor performance comparing the 2 vendors against each other by first making an initial recommendation based on the scoring procedure. This allows you to calculate for the score the systems and lets you determine which vendor should be selected. Lastly, you document all of these findings. The 2 EHR vendors I chose to compare were eClinicalWorks and McKesson, which are the top 2 most popular EMR software according to an article I read. The made-up decision makers I chose and interviewed were the CMO and CFO of fictitious George Mason Hospital. When interviewing these 2 people, the most important attributes they said they would want in an EHR system were ease of use, cost, and compatibility. Next, they were asked to rate the levels of each criterion on a scale from 0 to 100. Then they were asked to rate the relative importance of each attribute. After the interviews, the data collected was used to make tables from it. These tables show the ratings of the levels of each criterion, comparing how the CMO and how the CFO each felt about eClinicalWorks and McKesson. These 2 tables show the 2 decision makers' ratings of the relative importance for each criterion. Referring to the last slide, the 2 decision makers were asked to rank the relative importance of each criterion. For example, for the CMO's rank of importance, I got the scores by first asking him which of the 3 criteria, ease of use, cost, or compatibility, is least important to him. He said cost, so then we gave that a score of 10, indicating the lowest score. Then I asked how many times more important do you feel the other 2 criteria, ease of use and compatibility, are compared to cost. He said ease of use is 4 times more important and compatibility is 7 times more. Then I multiplied each factor by 10, giving ease of use a score of 40 from 4 times 10, and compatibility a score of 70 from 7 times 10. For the CMO's rank of the importance, I got the weights by taking 1 criteria score and dividing it by the sum of the scores for all the criteria, and repeating that same process for the other 2 criteria. For example, for the CMO's rank of importance, his ease of use was 40, and the total sum of all criteria scores was 120. So to calculate the weight from that, you do 40 divided by 120, which equals a weight of 0.33 over score. The consensus model considers the preferences of both the CMO and the CFO by taking, for example, the average of two ratings, one by the CMO and one by the CFO, for a certain criterion and consolidating that into one number. The consensus model is shown on the bottom of this slide. On the other hand, the standardized rates consensus model takes the raw data from the consensus model and scales it to come up with more standardized rates, making it easier to compare the two vendors later on. Using the data from the previous table, when comparing the two vendors for each of the three criteria, whichever one of them out of the two got a higher score for a certain criterion, the higher score becomes 100 and the lower score becomes 0 in this new standardized rates table, which is at the bottom of this slide. Rank of importance was also calculated as a consensus table, in which, just like before, the averages of all the criteria were averaged together to form one number for each criteria. They were told that the lowest criterion of importance would receive a score of 10, which was ease of use, which I determined from comparing the sums of each type of attribute with one another to see which had the lowest combined score, and ease of use had the lowest. Compatibility was given a factor of 3 because I did the average of the two values for how much more they were considered by the CMO and CFO previously, which was 1 and 7. Cost was given a factor of 5 times more important using the same method with the two numbers I used to average it from being 1 and 10. Then I multiplied each factor by 10 to get my score. So for cost, it was 5 times 10 to give a score of 50, and for compatibility, it was 3 times 10 to yield a score of 30. Then I determined each weight by dividing each criterion score by the total of the scores for all criteria. So for ease of use, it was 10 divided by 90, which 90 being the sum of all the scores, which equals 0.11 over score for the weight. And then for cost, it was 50 divided by 90, which yields a weight of 0.55 over score. And then for compatibility, it was 30 divided by 90, which gives a weight of 0.33 over score. This slide shows the table of the standardized weights of importance, for which the calculations to arrive at those numbers were shown and discussed in the previous slide. To come up with a recommendation, you need some calculations to back your findings. The equation used to calculate the overall score for each vendor to determine which one is better is, for eClinicalWorks, the formula is the weight for ease of use times the rating for eClinicalWorks for ease of use, plus the weight for cost times the rating for eClinicalWorks for cost, plus the weight for compatibility times the rating for eClinicalWorks for compatibility, which equals the overall score for eClinicalWorks. So it would be 0.11 over score times 100 plus 0.55 over score times 100 plus 0.33 over score times 100, which gives eClinicalWorks a overall score of 100. And it's the same equation and method for calculating McKesson's overall score. So it would be the weight for ease of use times the rating for McKesson for ease of use, plus the weight for cost times the rating for McKesson for cost. Plus the weight for compatibility times the rating for McKesson for compatibility, which equals the overall score for McKesson. So it would be 0.11 over score times 0 plus 0.55 over score times 0 plus 0.33 over score times 0, which gives McKesson an overall score of 0. So because eClinicalWorks has the higher score, it is the recommended EHR vendor to select. So for the introspection, for the value of participatory vendor selection, vendor selection is so much more than just evaluating the scores of different EHR vendors on certain criteria and picking the best one based on that. This is because it gives the analysts the chance to get everyone in the organization ready for possible upcoming changes in the near future. It is the process of making everyone buy into the selection. So therefore, scoring the vendors on set predefined attributes takes a backdrop to the consensus process, which is what truly matters in the end. If all parties feel involved and actively engaged in the decision-making process, getting all of their questions and concerns answered, then they'll be much more willing to actually implement the new change and not debate some more on it after the meeting is over. Scoring is just a formality. It's the conversations that happen in the meeting room with the vendor consultant that ultimately help a company make the right decision in regards to switching to a new vendor or not. For the value of quantification, so for quantification, decision makers are asked to rate attributes about several EHR vendors to see which one is better. It's better to quantify that information and not have it in words and descriptions, because then you can analyze that data. Any set of numbers represents data, which can be analyzed by looking at trends or patterns in it over time. In this case, you can compare trends. You can compare your company's two decision makers' ratings to the year before, or to another company's ratings, or to expert opinions ratings, or to published literature to see if your ratings were biased or not, and in line with how everyone else rated. Then, with that information, you can ask yourself, what am I doing differently? And that will help you change your approach to rate vendors differently the next time you do so. Also, when selecting a vendor, if you don't use numbers, formulas, and metrics to calculate your results to determine which vendor had a higher total score to be the one that's recommended to be chosen, your process can become subjective and biased, using words and description. Using numbers helps minimize bias because they're objective. And lastly, for the value of conducting interviews before the general meeting, this is important because it represents one-on-one time that the decision makers have with the interviewer. They are in a private meeting, not disturbed or influenced by anyone or anything going on in the office, and it gives them a chance to ask whatever questions they have to the interviewer about the vendors without feeling pressured one way or another. One-on-one time is also more intimate and personal than in a large group setting, so it allows better teaching someone the process instead of in a group environment.